It started with a casual suggestion, one of those offhand comments that seemed harmless at the time. My wife, Emily, had been talking about how she wanted to get back into shape after our second anniversary trip. "Why don't you try that new fitness studio downtown?" I'd said, not thinking much about it. She loved the idea, and within a week, she'd signed up for personal training sessions. Emily threw herself into it with a determination that was both admirable and, admittedly, surprising. She'd always been disciplined when it came to her career, but fitness? That was new. She'd come home glowing, talking about how great she felt and how motivating her trainer, Mark, was. I remember teasing her, saying, "You're more excited about this guy than you were on our wedding day." She laughed, but looking back, there was something in her smile, a flicker I couldn't place. Mark, as it turned out, wasn't just a trainer. He was one of those magnetic people who seemed to light up a room simply by walking into it. When I met him for the first time at a charity 5K Emily had signed us up for, I immediately understood his appeal. He was tall, fit, and exuded confidence in a way that bordered on arrogance but somehow stayed charming. "You must be the lucky husband," he'd said, flashing me a dazzling smile as he extended a hand. His grip was firm, his eyes sharp. There was an intensity to him that made me feel, for just a moment, like I was being sized up. Over the next few months, Emily's routine became increasingly rigid. She'd wake up at 5 a.m. for early morning sessions, come home late after work because she'd squeezed in another workout, and spend her weekends at fitness events Mark had highly recommended. Her dedication was admirable, but it also started creating a distance between us. Our once frequent date nights dwindled, replaced by her exhaustion or her need to stick to her meal plan. I'd joke about stealing a fry off her plate, and she'd brush me off with a tight smile. At first, I dismissed it as a phase, a new passion that would eventually settle into her routine. But then, little things started nagging at me. There were moments when she'd come home and immediately head to the shower, her face flushed in a way that didn't seem to match the light workouts she claimed to have had. I'd catch her texting late at night, her phone screen tilted just out of my view. Once, when I playfully reached for it, she yanked it away so quickly that she nearly dropped it. "Work stuff," she'd said, laughing nervously. "You know how Karen gets about deadlines." Karen was her boss, notorious for sending emails at odd hours. The excuse made sense, until it didn't. The first real crack appeared during a lazy Sunday afternoon. Emily had left her phone on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs folding laundry. A message popped up, and out of sheer curiosity, I glanced at it. It was from Mark. "Can't stop thinking about this morning. Same time tomorrow?" My heart sank. I stared at the words, willing them to mean something innocent, something benign. Maybe they'd had an early workout, and he was just planning the next session. But the phrasing gnawed at me. Can't stop thinking about this morning. What had happened that morning? I confronted Emily that evening, trying to keep my tone light. "Hey, so, Mark texted you earlier. Something about this morning?" Her reaction was immediate and visceral. Her face flushed, her eyes darting to her phone. "Oh, that? He's just really into these new circuits we've been trying. He's intense like that. Intense enough to text you on a Sunday?" I pressed, keeping my voice even. "Yes, because he's my trainer, and he's passionate about what he does," she snapped, grabbing her phone and heading upstairs without another word. That night, she climbed into bed without kissing me goodnight, something she hadn't done since our first fight as newlyweds. The next few weeks were a haze of suspicion and second-guessing. I started noticing patterns, the way she'd smile when her phone buzzed, the extra time she'd spend getting ready for her sessions, the subtle but undeniable shift in her demeanor when she talked about Mark. My mind went to dark places, but I kept telling myself I was being paranoid. Emily loved me. She'd always been loyal, always been honest. Hadn't she? It all came to a head on a Friday night. Emily had claimed she was meeting up with some friends from work for dinner, but something about her story didn't add up. She'd been vague about who was going, and when I'd asked if I could join, she'd brushed me off with a weak excuse about it being a girls-only thing. So, when she left, I followed her. I felt ridiculous, like a jealous, insecure husband, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to uncover something that would change everything. She didn't go to the restaurant she'd mentioned. Instead, she drove across town to a small boutique hotel. My stomach churned as I parked a safe distance away and watched her walk inside. She was dressed to the nines in a way that didn't scream, "Girls' night out." My hands shook as I debated what to do next. Storm in and confront her? Wait and see. I chose the latter. An hour passed, then two. When she finally emerged, she wasn't alone. Mark was with her. They laughed as they walked to his car, and then, right there in the parking lot, he pulled her into a kiss. It wasn't a casual peck, either. It was the kind of kiss that left no room for misinterpretation. The world tilted on its axis. My mind raced, 1,000 thoughts colliding at once. Should I confront them now? Call her out later? My hands clenched the steering wheel as I watched them drive off together, disappearing into the night. When Emily came home later, her excuse was as flimsy as wet tissue paper. Dinner ran late, she said, avoiding my eyes. I didn't push her, not yet. I needed time to process, to decide how to handle the betrayal that had just shattered our lives. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The following morning, I woke up to an overwhelming sense of dread. Emily was already gone, leaving a note on the counter about an early yoga class. The irony wasn't lost on me. My mind replayed the events of the previous night in painful, vivid detail. Mark's arms around her, that kiss, it was seared into my memory like a scar. I sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at my coffee. Every sip felt heavier than the last. I could have stormed into that hotel last night. I could have demanded answers. But what would that have accomplished? Public humiliation for both of us? An angry confrontation with a man I didn't know if I could take in a fight? No, I needed a plan, something measured, something that would give me clarity before I acted. The first step was confirming my suspicions. Emily's phone had always been her sanctuary, password protected and never out of arm's reach. But I had a workaround. Months ago, we'd shared our cloud storage accounts to back up photos from our vacation. If she'd synced her messages or photos, there might be something there. It felt wrong, invasive even, but she'd crossed a line, and I needed to know the truth. I logged into the shared account from my laptop, my fingers trembling as I typed the password. At first, there was nothing out of the ordinary, pictures of us from the trip, a few of her friends, and some candid shots of our dog. But then, buried in a folder labeled Fitness Progress, I found them. The first photo was innocuous enough, Emily in her workout gear, smiling at the camera. But the next one made my stomach lurch. It was a selfie of her and Mark, his arm draped casually around her shoulders, both of them sweaty and grinning like teenagers. The timestamps matched the morning she'd claimed to be at yoga. My hands shook as I scrolled further. There were dozens of pictures, some taken at the gym, others in places I didn't recognize. One photo, in particular, stood out, Emily sitting on a bench in what looked like a park, her head resting on Mark's shoulder. It was intimate in a way that felt unmistakably wrong. I'd seen enough. My stomach churned with a mix of anger and nausea as I slammed the laptop shut. The betrayal felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. But even then, I couldn't bring myself to confront her, not yet. I needed more. I needed to hear it from her own mouth. That night, I installed a voice-activated recorder in the kitchen, hidden behind the spice rack. It was a desperate move, but I had to know what was happening when I wasn't around. Emily's routine was predictable. she'd often take calls while cooking dinner or cleaning up. If there was anything to uncover, I'd find it there. The next few days were excruciating. Every time Emily walked through the door, I felt a surge of anger I had to swallow down. She'd kiss me on the cheek, ask about my day, and act as if everything was perfectly normal. Meanwhile, I was drowning in doubt, replaying every interaction in my head for hidden meanings. Finally, on the third day, I retrieved the recorder. My hands shook as I plugged it into my laptop and listened. Most of the audio was mundane, Emily humming while she cooked, the clatter of dishes, the faint buzz of the TV in the background. But then, about 15 minutes in, I heard her voice. "Hey, Mark. Yeah, I'm good. Just got home. You?" There was a pause, followed by a low murmur I couldn't make out. She laughed softly. "I know. Yesterday was intense. I've never felt like that before." Another pause. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. I've been careful." My heart pounded as I listened, every word confirming my worst fears. The conversation was brief, but it was enough. She was talking about me, about us, about him. There was no denying it anymore. That night, as Emily slept beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The anger I'd felt earlier was now something colder, sharper. It wasn't just the betrayal, it was the lies, the deceit, the sheer audacity of her actions. She'd made a fool of me, and I couldn't let it go unanswered. The next morning, I made a decision. If Emily could lie to my face and sneak around behind my back, I'd beat her at her own game. I called in sick to work and drove to the gym where she trained. It was a sleek, modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a steady stream of fit, attractive people coming and going. I felt out of place as I walked in, but I wasn't there to blend in. "Hi, I'm looking for Mark," I said to the receptionist, forcing a polite smile. She raised an eyebrow. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but it's important. He trains my wife, Emily. She left something at home, and I need to get it to her." The receptionist hesitated, then nodded toward a hallway. "He's in the back, second door on the right." I found him there, mid-session with a client. He glanced up as I entered, his expression shifting from curiosity to recognition. "Hey, you're Emily's husband, right? What can I do for you?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He excused himself from the session and followed me into the hallway. "What's this about?" he asked, leaning casually against the wall. I stared at him, taking in the easy confidence, the smugness that radiated off him. "I know what's been going on," I said quietly. "I saw you with her. At the hotel." For a moment, his expression faltered, the cocky facade slipping. But then he straightened, his smile returning. "Look, man, I don't know what you think you saw, but—" "Don't," I interrupted, my voice sharp. "Don't insult my intelligence. I've got pictures, messages, even recordings. So don't stand there and pretend this isn't happening." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, fine. You caught us. But if you think this is just about some fling, you're wrong. Emily's unhappy. She's been unhappy for a long time. Maybe you should ask yourself why she came to me in the first place." His words hit like a punch to the gut. Was he right? Had I been so blind to her feelings that she'd felt the need to seek comfort elsewhere? No. This wasn't on me. Whatever problems we'd had, this wasn't the solution. "Stay away from her," I said, my voice low and firm. "If you don't, I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man you are. And trust me, your reputation won't survive it." Mark's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Without another word, I turned and walked out, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the hallway. When I got home, Emily was waiting for me, her expression wary. "You're home early," she said, her voice tinged with suspicion. "We need to talk," I replied, closing the door behind me. Her face paled, but she didn't say a word. The moment of reckoning had finally come. Emily stared at me, her face pale and her hands trembling slightly as she set down the coffee mug she'd been holding. For a moment, the silence between us was deafening. It felt as though the walls of our home, once filled with laughter and warmth, now vibrated with tension and unspoken words. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice tentative, though she already knew the answer. I took a deep breath, my hands gripping the back of the kitchen chair for support. "I know, Emily. About Mark. About the hotel. About everything." Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw panic flash across her face. She quickly masked it, but not before the damage was done. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her tone defensive. I let out a bitter laugh. "Don't insult me, Emily. I've seen the pictures, read the messages, and heard the recordings. There's no point in lying anymore." She sank into a chair, her head in her hands. I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "It's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," I shot back. "You betrayed me. You betrayed us." Tears welled in her eyes, but instead of apologizing, she looked at me with a mixture of guilt and defiance. "You don't understand. I felt invisible, like I was just another part of your routine. Mark made me feel alive again. He made me feel seen." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. Invisible? After everything I'd done to support her, to make her happy? My mind raced with memories of anniversaries planned down to the last detail, of late nights listening to her worries about work, of the countless times I'd put her needs above my own. "So that's your excuse? I didn't pay you enough attention, so you decided to screw your trainer?" She flinched, but her defiance remained. "I'm not excusing it, but maybe if you'd been there for me, really there, this wouldn't have happened." "That's a hell of a way to shift the blame," I said, my voice cold. "Do you even hear yourself? You're not taking responsibility for what you've done. Instead, you're trying to pin it on me. Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds?" The tears spilled over then, streaming down her face. I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear I didn't. It got out of control." "How long?" I asked, my voice quiet but firm. "How long has this been going on?" She hesitated, and for a moment, I thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she whispered, "A few months." Months. The word echoed in my mind, amplifying the betrayal. Every kiss, every laugh, every shared moment during that time was tainted. My hands clenched into fists as I struggled to keep my composure. "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Why wasn't I enough for you?" She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I don't know. I wish I did. Maybe I was just selfish. Maybe I'm broken. I don't have an excuse, okay? I don't." I stared at her, the woman I'd once thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. She looked so small, so fragile, and yet all I could feel was anger and hurt. "You need to leave," I said finally. Her head snapped up. "What? No. Please, we can fix this." "No," I said firmly. "You made your choice, Emily. You chose him over us. Now you have to live with the consequences." She sobbed, but I didn't waver. I stood up, walking to the door and opening it. "Go to him if he makes you feel so alive. But don't come back here. Not tonight." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for any sign of forgiveness. When she found none, she nodded, grabbing her keys and walking out the door. The sound of it closing behind her was deafening, and for the first time in our marriage, the house felt unbearably empty. I sat down on the couch, my head in my hands, and let the tears come. They weren't just for her betrayal but for everything we'd lost, the trust, the love, the future we'd planned together. It felt like a death, and in many ways, it was. Hours later, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "This is Mark. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, my anger rekindling. He had the nerve to reach out to me. I wanted to smash the phone against the wall, to scream, to do anything to release the rage building inside me. Instead, I typed back, "We have nothing to talk about." A few moments later, another message came through. "You deserve to know the whole story. Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. Coffeehouse on 5th. I didn't respond. I wasn't sure if I wanted to hear anything more from him, but a part of me was curious. What could he possibly say that would make any of this better? That night, sleep was elusive. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Emily and Mark together, their smiles, their laughter. By the time morning came, I was exhausted but resolute. If Mark wanted to talk, I'd hear him out. But it wouldn't be on his terms. At 10 a.m., I walked into the coffeehouse, my heart pounding in my chest. Mark was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He looked up as I approached, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. I didn't respond, crossing my arms and waiting for him to speak. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I'm not here to justify what happened. I just think you should know. Emily's been struggling. She didn't tell you, but she's been seeing a therapist for months. She's been dealing with depression, and I guess I became her escape." His words caught me off guard. Depression? Emily had never mentioned anything about that. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice cold. "Because I think she still loves you," he said simply. "And if there's any chance of fixing things, you need to know the truth." I stared at him, my emotions swirling. Could I believe him? And even if I did, was love enough to repair the damage that had been done? I didn't have an answer, but one thing was certain, my life would never be the same. The following days felt like a blur, a surreal montage of confusion, anger, and doubt. I'd spent hours replaying Mark's words in my head, trying to reconcile the woman I thought I knew with the reality he'd painted. Depression. Therapy. An escape. Those weren't the Emily I knew. Or maybe they were, and I'd just been too blind to see it. Emily hadn't returned home since that night. She'd sent a few text messages, apologies that felt hollow, attempts to explain that only deepened the wound. I hadn't replied. I couldn't. Every time I looked at my phone, I felt the sting of betrayal all over again. On the 3rd evening, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my heart raced with the irrational hope that it might be Emily, ready to apologize in person and beg for forgiveness. Instead, it was someone I hadn't anticipated. "Karen?" I asked, blinking in surprise. Karen was Emily's boss, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who had always intimidated me a little. She stood on the porch, her expression unreadable. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her tone wasn't warm, but it wasn't hostile either. I stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. She walked into the living room, looking around briefly before turning to face me. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," she began, "but I thought you should know something about Emily." My stomach tightened. "What is it?" Karen hesitated, then said, "Emily handed in her resignation yesterday. She said she needed time to figure things out. I tried to convince her to stay, but she was adamant." I stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Emily had quit her job. That was her dream position, the one she'd worked so hard to achieve. It didn't make sense. Why are you telling me this? I asked, my voice cautious. Karen sighed. Because I'm worried about her. She's been off for a while now. Distracted, anxious. At first, I thought it was just work stress, but now I'm not so sure. She's been seeing someone, a man who's not you. The bluntness of her statement left me momentarily speechless. I know, I said finally, my voice hollow. That's why she's not here. Karen's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry. I just thought you deserved to know. Emily, she's not herself lately. If there's any way you can reach her, help her, maybe. Her words trailed off, leaving the unspoken plea hanging in the air. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. Karen left shortly after, her visit only adding to the storm of emotions swirling inside me. That night, I finally replied to Emily's texts. We need to talk. Face to face. She responded almost immediately, agreeing to meet the next day at a park near our house. It was a place we'd gone to often, back when things were simpler. The next morning, I arrived early, sitting on a bench overlooking the small pond. The air was crisp, the early signs of autumn painting the trees in shades of gold and red. I spotted Emily as she approached, her figure familiar yet somehow different. She looked tired, her shoulders slumped, her steps hesitant. Hi, she said softly, sitting down beside me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence was heavy, filled with everything we wanted to say but couldn't find the words for. Finally, I broke the silence. Why did you quit your job? She looked down at her hands, twisting her wedding ring nervously. Because I couldn't handle it anymore. The pressure, the guilt, the lies, it was all too much. So running away was your solution? I asked, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. She flinched but didn't argue. Maybe. I don't know. I needed to stop pretending everything was okay. I shook my head, my frustration boiling over. Emily, you had a choice. You could have talked to me, told me how you were feeling. Instead, you turned to him. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? Tears welled in her eyes. I'm sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But Mark, he wasn't the answer either. I see that now. Do you? I asked, my voice quieter now. Because it feels like you're only sorry because you got caught. She shook her head vehemently. No. That's not it. I've been a mess for months, and I didn't know how to tell you. I thought I could handle it on my own, but I couldn't. And Mark, he was just there. He made me feel better in the moment, but it was a mistake. A huge mistake. Her words were earnest, but I couldn't tell if they were enough. The pain she'd caused didn't disappear with an apology. I don't know if I can forgive you, Emily, I admitted. Even if I wanted to, I don't know how. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I needed you to know that I'm sorry, and I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. I don't want to lose you. The sincerity in her voice tugged at something deep inside me. Despite everything, part of me still loved her. But love wasn't the same as trust, and trust was something she'd shattered. I need time, I said finally. Time to figure out if we can even start to fix this. She nodded again, wiping her tears. Take all the time you need. I'll wait. As she walked away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, hope. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time in days, it felt like there might be one. Weeks turned into months. Emily and I lived separate lives, but the threads that had once tied us together remained stubbornly unbroken. I moved into a small apartment downtown, needing space to sort out my emotions. Emily stayed in the house, alone with her thoughts and the ghosts of our marriage. During this time, I started therapy, something I'd never thought I'd do. Sitting across from a stranger and unraveling my life felt awkward at first, but it also brought clarity. My therapist, Dr. Howard, didn't just help me process Emily's betrayal, she made me confront my own role in our fractured marriage. I hadn't been perfect. I'd let work consume me, assuming that the stability I provided was enough to keep us both afloat. It wasn't. Emily, too, sought help. She started seeing a new therapist, someone who specialized in relationships and personal growth. She texted me updates occasionally, never pushing, just letting me know she was working on herself. I read every message but rarely responded. I wasn't ready. Then, one cold December evening, she called. Hearing her voice again after weeks of silence felt strange, almost surreal. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from," she began, her voice tentative. "But I wanted to tell you something." "What is it?" I asked, my tone neutral. "I've been volunteering at a shelter downtown," she said. "It's not much, but it's helped me see things differently. About myself. About us." Her words caught me off guard. Emily had always been kind, but this felt like more than that. It felt like growth. "That's good," I said after a pause. "I'm glad you're doing something meaningful." "I know I can't undo what I did," she continued. "But I'm trying to be better, for myself and, if there's ever a chance, for us." Her vulnerability was disarming. I'd spent so much time being angry, building walls around my heart, that I hadn't considered what it might mean to let her in again. "Emily, I don't know what the future holds. But I'm glad you're working on yourself." We ended the call on a tentative note of understanding. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, but it was a step forward. The real turning point came on Christmas Eve. I hadn't planned to spend the holiday with anyone, the idea of facing family or friends felt overwhelming. But that afternoon, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Emily stood there, holding a small box wrapped in simple brown paper. "I know I shouldn't have come," she said quickly, "but I wanted to give you this." I hesitated before stepping aside to let her in. She handed me the box, her hands trembling slightly. "Open it," she urged. Inside was a leather-bound journal. The pages were filled with entries written in Emily's neat, looping handwriting. "It's everything," she said softly. "All the things I should have told you but didn't know how. My thoughts, my fears, my mistakes. I needed you to know." I thumbed through the pages, catching glimpses of raw, unfiltered honesty. One entry stood out. "*I betrayed him, not just by being with Mark but by shutting him out. I was scared, lost, and I made terrible choices. But the truth is, I've always loved him. Even when I didn't know how to show it. **. Tears blurred my vision as I closed the journal. "Emily, this is a lot to take in." "I know," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to have it. To understand." We stood there in silence, the weight of her words settling between us. Finally, I spoke. "I can't promise we'll ever go back to what we were. But maybe we can figure out what's next. Together." Her eyes filled with hope, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the woman I'd fallen in love with. "I'd like that," she said. Rebuilding wasn't easy. It took time, patience, and more honesty than either of us was used to. There were setbacks, moments when the past threatened to overshadow the progress we'd made. But there were also moments of connection, shared laughter, deep conversations, and small acts of kindness that reminded us why we'd chosen each other in the first place. In the end, it wasn't about erasing the pain or pretending the betrayal hadn't happened. It was about finding a way to move forward, to build something new from the pieces of what we'd lost. And though the future remained uncertain, one thing was clear: we were both willing to try. Sometimes, love isn't about perfection. It's about resilience. And for us, that was enough.